What's going on, everybody? Jared Sandler here, welcoming you into another episode of the Just a Sec Conversation. We've got episode 67 coming your way with a rising star in the broadcasting industry and one of my close friends, Ted Emrich. You probably have heard of the late Roger Emrich, Ted's father. We chat with Ted about growing up with the Raj Mahal and the impact and influence his father had on him, plus the great experience of getting to call a Dallas Cowboys game in New Orleans against the Saints on Sunday Night Football last season. All that and more with Ted. Of course, would really appreciate it if you would consider liking this interview, giving it the thumbs up, commenting, subscribing to the channel. We got all sorts of content on the channel, or even just taking this link and sharing it with some of your friends. All that stuff would really, really go a long way in supporting this project, and I would really appreciate it. Without further ado, here's episode 67 of the Just a Sec Conversation with my man, Ted Emrich. All right, Ted, I ask everyone this to start. It's incredibly generic, but sometimes people give interesting answers. Other times they don't. But when you think back to your childhood, what stands out? And you can take it in whatever direction you'd like. There's no prompt or no direction I'm looking for other than what stands out when you think back to your childhood.
My childhood? That wasn't that long ago. It's funny. I was just listening to part one of your episode with Brad Sham and really, really enjoying it. I'm not bringing that up just so I can butter you up, but you are one of my best friends, and so I don't mind doing that. And it was interesting to hear how you phrased it to Brad. What was it about, sports or play-by-play or whatever, as a kid, and, he professed his love just going to ball games. And for me, I can tell you, yes, on one hand, it's very similar, and obviously being exposed to it as a kid, being around my dad, Roger Emrich. But beyond that, as I was listening, Brad talk about, well, he had the dream of being, a major league ball player, of course, and that is such a common story for broadcasters. It's funny for me, I never had any of those illusions, like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be in the NBA. I'm going to be in the NFL. Like that dream was so far beyond my imagination, but I loved sports. I loved the drama of it. I loved competition. It's funny though, if you asked my mom, she would tell you that the two jobs that I wanted as a kid, like my dream jobs, were, number one, meteorologist. I swear to you, I loved the Weather Channel.
You and Mike Trout.
Really? I didn't know that.
He loves the weather.
Man, I loved the Weather Channel and still do to a degree, but man, I was all about that as a kid. And number two, game show host. Like, I loved Press Your Luck, and I missed its original run, but as a kid growing up, I would catch all the reruns, like I think it was on USA, and eventually the Game Show Network started, and I loved that show. That was my favorite game show growing up, and people are winning money, and they're so happy, and it just seemed like such a cool job. But obviously I gravitated toward sports where, when you have the highs and lows and the thrills and everything that goes into it, we those of us who are fortunate enough to work in the business, we all know why we gravitated towards it. But that was eventually it for me. And, oh, by the way, yeah, you get to go to the game. You get to have the best seat in the house, and you get to describe what you see for everyone at home or in their car or whatever. That just sounded so cool to me.
All right, so I want to hit this game show thing, if that's okay, because I don't know that I ever, I was the guy that you described. I wanted to be a professional athlete. And one of the things I was going to ask you is that I know that was not, a part of your dreams, but you addressed that. But I think I was too busy wanting to be a professional athlete to realize that, I loved game shows too. And the other day, I spent more time than I care to admit watching old episodes of Supermarket Sweep. I loved Supermarket Sweep. there was a show that Wink Martindale was the host for, not the Baltimore Ravens, Wink Martindale, but the game show host.
Yes.
And it was something about like erase your debt or I forget, but like, and I was like 7 years old. I didn't know what debt was. Like, I didn't understand it, but like all these people would go ape, you know what, when their $50,000 debt was erased. And it's like, my goodness, I'd love to be on that game show today. Okay. But so you mentioned a couple, but like what, like my dream is to be on Wheel of Fortune as a contestant. Like Jeopardy's cool. I don't think I would win Jeopardy. I would win Wheel of Fortune as long as I didn't get some bad luck on the wheel. But like, where would you like to be a contestant on? What show?
Oh man. Oh gosh. I would love to say Jeopardy because I am a huge fan of the show, but honestly, it depends on what categories you get. I feel like I could be that person very easily. I could be that person that never rings in, and like you might as well put a potted plant behind their signaling device. Like I would need a sports category. We would all clean up on that, obviously, and that's why it's so much fun when you have the viral clips of Anupama and Colorado Rocky, yeah. Right? But I could see that going very, very poorly for me if I don't get the right categories. Like you throw up, Russian history. It's just I have no chance.
Yeah, that's my fear too. Like I think that the right categories I could compete, but I don't think that my scope of categories is wide enough for me to feel like I have a chance to win. Does that make sense?
I would hope. Yes, I mean, my eyes glaze over like when you have art from the Renaissance, or something like that. I'm just like, come on.
And what about the categories that are like?
There's always the one contestant who just sweeps that category, and they happen to be an art history major or something.
Well, and then what about the categories where it's not even totally clear before you get a question, like what the category actually represents? Like,
yes,
those ones,
potables.
Yeah, like what? Although, yeah, I would be great at Celebrity Jeopardy on SNL. I think I could ace that.
Oh, I'd be awesome at that.
Yeah.
Just ruffling the feathers of fake Alex Trebek, Will Ferrell, put on the fake Sean Connery accent. Oh, it'd be brilliant. The other game shows that the game show within the game show that I absolutely loved as a kid was Plinko on
Price is Right.
Oh man,
I loved it too.
I loved Plinko.
Yes,
absolutely loved it. Just I don't know, it was mesmerizing as a kid.
So I still, for baseball games, if there's ever a foul ball that kind of cascades down the seats, I say yes. Plinko's. I use Plinko as a verb in honor of that.
That's perfect. Oh my, that is awesome. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, please do.
Which I'm not going to do, but if that ever comes up, that is awesome.
I would be honored if you use that word. Gosh, we could just go on about game shows forever. I need to tell you the story about how I almost was a contestant on The Price is Right, but I wasn't. And
really?
My buddy won the Showcase Showdown. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So would that have been you?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I would have had the skills, but basically if you go to The Price is Right with a big enough group, then I think you have to like register beforehand, but I think you're like guaranteed a contestant.
Wow, your odds go up significantly.
Yeah,
they want to do you a solid or
and
something.
So yeah, when I was at USC, there would be a lot of these outings where it's like you'd go on a Price is Right outing, and that's why they get a lot of students a lot of the time. It's a lot of like, yeah, but you're going with a lot of kids, and the odds of you getting picked still aren't tremendous, but I guess they're heightened a little bit. But I was not picked, but I would like to be on a game show of some kind at some point. Like that to me would be fun.
Remember our friend Doug Anderson, who does the high school game of the week, formerly on TXA 21, now moving to the CW 33. He was a contestant on The Weakest Link several years back. I'm going to send you the YouTube clip, and we can send it out individually, but I don't know, maybe Doug wouldn't want that. I think he gets a kick out of it, but it did not go well for Dookie.
Oh no.
It did not go. He should have thrown in a come on at the end, but he was determined to be or he was certainly labeled the weakest link.
What did he say? Was it a favorable experience? Did he? What was her name? The host was a British
Oh
lady, right?
gosh, yes, yes, and she had her, she had her time. Gosh, I forgot her name, but yeah, no, just the look she would give you, just staring daggers into you as you are eliminated from the show. It's funny to see poor Doogie just get wiped away like that.
Oh man, and what a good guy too. He doesn't deserve that. All right, Ted, I got to ask you. So, you mentioned your father, the late Roger Emrich, who's a legend in the industry, one of the all-time great human beings in this industry. And you got to kind of roll around with him when you were younger. So I imagine your understanding of the industry was a little bit better, a little bit earlier on than most. So I guess what do you remember when you first started seriously learning about the industry, and what were some of your initial impressions when you got to tag along with Pops?
Yeah, I knew he kept odd hours. That's probably the first thing that I remember as a kid, because he was either working morning drive, which meant he was out the door, 3:30, for, his first sportscast would be around 5:15 for that morning shift on KRLD on 1080. Or if he was in afternoon drive, he obviously wouldn't be there when I get home from school. And on top of that, he might be covering a game. So, he might be going to the ballpark or reunion, eventually the AAC. It's just, first of all, it's weird hours, and it's nights, and it's holidays, and it's, obviously we can all in these parts say that Cowboys games can be treated as holidays. They're one and the same. And that was one of the first events that I remember tagging along with him to was a Cowboys game. And we would sit in the auxiliary press box at the old Texas Stadium, and it was just so cool just to be a part of that. And, he eventually put me to work because he would obviously be there in the press box during the game, and afterwards. It was one of his responsibilities was to get sound for, the next morning, the week ahead. And there are 2 locker rooms. And if there was something interesting enough in the other locker room, he would give me a recorder, and I would take care of that. So one of my earliest memories was the time that Emmett returned to Texas Stadium as an Arizona Cardinal. And I remember the swarm of people around him in the post-game scrum. Just being in the center of that and holding the mic up. And I have never told her this, but I am 95% sure Emily Jones told me to lower my mic because I was holding it too high, which was absolutely the right thing to say. You can't have the KRLD mic flag obstructing Emmitt Smith's face. And I always remember that. And again, just you pick up those little things, just being around it and picking that up as a teenager, as opposed to a college intern or a college graduate, and it's your first job, and you don't know what you don't know. It was so helpful. And again, this is well before I'm even on the air or anything. That would come, late high school and early in college. It was protocol. It was how to treat people, how to be a professional, how to dress even. Just those little things that I was extremely fortunate to pick up at an early age. And of course, on top of that, like, you're sitting next to your dad, who, is my best friend, and we're watching the legendary moments back and forth when Emmett was still a Cowboy, and T.O. goes off and is on the star, and George Teague tackles him, and Emmett scores a touchdown, and he plants the football on the star, and just looking at my dad in wide-eyed wonder, being able to share some of those moments. Even though at the time, obviously, the Cowboys weren't very good. When I first started going to games, it was still a Dallas Cowboys game at Texas Stadium, and it was just such an honor to share that and just to have that privilege to be able to tag along with my dad.
Okay, so first question here, and for people who maybe aren't as familiar, you can't just it's not as simple as, hey, I'm going to bring my son to the press box and let him go to the locker room. It's not like bring your kid to work where, whatever happens, happens. Like, you've got to get approval. You got to get permission. So clearly, I think it says something about you or maybe just the trust that they had in your dad to let little old Ted go to the locker room and chase tape. But do you remember, was there ever any pushback that you were aware of, or it was just, as far as you knew, it was always yeah, no, that's cool, whatever, no big deal?
There was the Cowboys. It was never an issue. Again, I had a credential, and the bosses at KRLD had no problem with it. As long as again, in that situation, you're representing the station, even though I'm not an employee. I'm still with my dad, and the Cowboys had no problem with it. KRLD had no problem with it. And yes, you have to demonstrate a certain ability in that moment, how you carry yourself. Listen, if I was just some wild-eyed, what would I have been back then, 13, 14-year-old, and just cutting up, and, that would have ended. That experiment would have ended. And, I didn't want to let my dad down either, obviously. I remember early on, maybe a few years before that, I wouldn't have been in the role of okay, you can go down and get this interview or, be, chasing tape, like you said. But a few years before that, he tried to take me to a Rangers game, and I remember there being pushback. But outside of that, everyone in the area, they were on board. And again, it wasn't that big a deal, because I would go with my dad to practices or whatever, whenever I could. If I wasn't in school, I knew even at that age, I wanted to do this. I wanted to be a part of this, and in some way, and I quickly gravitated toward play-by-play, but just any taste of sports media at that point, I wanted everything that I could get, all the experience.
All right, I want to ask you about the play-by-play stuff in a second, but before we move on, I want to, you are still, despite all your accomplishments, a lot of the older generation, oh, that's Roger's son, or you're Roger's son, or is Roger your dad, or you're still linked to your dad. And I know for some people that's not something they like, but and your dad passed away, and it's so clear the love that he developed in this community, it's amazing. I'll never forget how many people showed up to the funeral, and just how many people the next day. I think where it really got me is how much time was spent the very next day on sports talk radio in the Metroplex talking about your dad in all three stations. Yeah. And it was really cool, and it's a testament to how awesome of a guy he was, and I'm thankful that I got the chance to know him and spend some time with him. Back to being Roger's son, it seems like that's something that it's never bothered you, because you've never gotten, you've earned everything you've gotten, and you embrace the memory, I guess, of your dad, and embrace the fact that you're connected to him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Why wouldn't you? And obviously what I wanted to do and what I'm doing now is a little bit different than my dad. My dad had dreams of being a play-by-play announcer. There is no question. That is what he was focused on as he was doing high school football in Louisiana, his first job out of college in Laplace, Louisiana. And when he was hired at KDNT, his first job in Texas, the now defunct KDNT in Denton, a commercial station up there. This is before KRLD, before even he was even in Austin as the Capitol bureau chief doing news on Texas State Network. He always wanted to do sports and he wanted to do play-by-play, but he could never move beyond doing high school sports, and he loved high school sports, but he wanted to do more. It's just sometimes it's timing is a factor, and you have a family, and it's hard, as we all know. It is very hard. The business, overall, but especially in play-by-play, where there are only so many positions out there, whether it be for a team or obviously if you're fortunate enough to land with a network somewhere. And so, when you hear, you're a chip off the old block and, your dad taught you well, it's like, yeah, he did. That's that's not an insult. I will tell you, Jared, it did take years for me to get to that point. It used to be, this is years ago, I used to feel like, on one hand, I want to be my own man. I want to get out from under that shadow. And just the connotation of that word is negative, shadow. And it's something I fought internally for a few years. I'm doing this when my dad is a Hall of Famer doing that. He is the public address voice, the Dallas Cowboys for 8 years. He was a Texas Radio Hall of Famer primarily for his incredible run at KRLD as an anchor and a reporter. And I did that early on, but it was always play-by-play. That was always the goal, and that's what I did on the side, and I'm very thankful that I get to do that full-time now with ESPN and Westwood One. But just whenever you would hear that bit about, well, your dad really taught you well, and he did in many areas, but I wanted to always make sure that I could figure things out on my own. I wanted to be judged on my own merit, and I didn't want to be hired anywhere because, my dad held sway or anything like that. And that's why I wanted to carve my own path. And it's why I moved from the Fan. My first year out of college, I was working part-time at the Fan, and I moved to ESPN Radio, 103.3 FM. It was a bigger role, but I also didn't want to just hear the constant questions of, well, you're only there because your dad, is there full-time. And that, I will admit, stuff like that bothered me. I would hear comments behind my back. Again, I heard this secondhand, and so I don't know how much stock I should put into it, but I did hear it, through the grapevine, like, a student at a classmate of mine at North Texas. How can I compete with him? Like, his dad is Roger Emrich. I can't compete with that. Like, he's going to be hired and this and that, and it just that on one hand it angered me, but it also fueled me and motivated me. And I wanted to make sure, like, okay, yes, there is no doubt I have benefited from this privilege to grow up like this and to learn from him and be exposed to the business. You know what? I got to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, 4 times as hard, because I don't want there to be any question whether I am good enough to be on the air. And now, I'm so glad that I came around on that front. It's funny. I mean, it's a psychological discussion, and I'm sorry to lead you down this road.
No, this is what I want.
You did ask.
I did.
There has never been any rift or anything or resentment. It was just always in my own mind. Like, number one, I want to be my own broadcaster while also being grateful for, again, having him as my father. And that can be difficult. I can, again, at a much, much, much higher level, I can only imagine what Joe Buck has had to deal with. And that's why I've never met him. I have always enjoyed his work. I've always felt it sounds stupid to say, but I've always felt a kinship with him, especially after reading his book, because I get it. I know what he deals with. And the fact that he still deals with it today, the cries of nepotism, and the only reason you're there at Fox is because of Jack Buck. Jack Buck has nothing to do with Fox. Jack Buck has, he passed away 20 plus years ago. Stop. Enough with that. He's the number one guy at Fox for a reason, because he's damn good. And like I said, that is at a whole different level than where I am. But just here locally, and as I have, made my way to ESPN and Westwood One, like, they have no idea who Roger Emrich is or was. Some do, but I feel for anybody who has to go through that and deal with that kind of unfounded criticism.
I appreciate you sharing all that because first of all, it's awesome just to think about your dad. I know you think about him constantly, but to hear the impact he had, but also to hear you kind of open up about that. I've heard you go into it a little bit when we speak together at classes, but I've never heard you really dive into it like that. So I just wanted to let you know I appreciate you sharing that.
No, of course, and and of course it leads to, how can I put this? I want to organize my thoughts properly. After he died last year, I just, thank goodness, like I said earlier, thank goodness there was never any rift or resentment or anything like that, or any period where we didn't talk. Like, we were always best friends. He was more, yes, he was my dad, but he was like an older brother to me too, in that sense, as a friend, mentor and all of that. And, it was just in my own mind, like, I would try to battle that, like, and then you're putting too much pressure on yourself, and then no good comes from that. More than anything, what my dad imparted to me, Jared, it went beyond anything on the air. It was how to treat people. It was how you interact with everyone on the crew, and just his kind spirit, how gentle he was, how generous he was, and that carries over to any line of work. And that's what I'm grateful for, that he was just such a warm, loving, a genuinely good human being. Like you said earlier about the outpouring of support and the memories that people shared. And I mean, he led the 10 o'clock news Sunday night on Channel 8. I will never forget that. Like, I would never imagine that, but that's the kind of legacy that he left behind, and I am so proud that I get to pick that up and carry it forward in my own way.
You mentioned earlier that he had his path, but you really became drawn to play-by-play. And you've had some non-play-by-play gigs, and I guess you still, to some degree, do, but, you have them for some major events like, majors in golf and the Olympics, and even the Olympics, there's play-by-play involved, maybe not the traditional sports, but I know one of my proudest experiences in broadcasting, it doesn't even involve me, was driving home from a Rangers game last year and hearing you on the radio filling in for Brad Sham calling Cowboys-Saints. And Brad is a legend, and I think all Cowboys fans love hearing him every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, the occasional Saturday, whatever. But he was unable to broadcast that game. And I'm just curious for you. I mean, this is not only an NFL game, but it's the Dallas Cowboys, and the Dallas Cowboys locally, which is your home market, and everything tied to that. Your dad, being the voice of AT&T Stadium, and your dad also being from Louisiana and being a big New Orleans guy, and the Cowboys playing New Orleans. I mean, there's just so many things that were so perfect about that. What was that experience like? And as we're, I guess almost a year removed from that, what are the things that still stand out?
As Brad so eloquently put it, and he put it better than any of us could, as usual, it was a spiritual synchronicity. The fact that he missed the game for religious reasons, which I respect so much, and all of those reasons you just laid out. It's where my mom and dad met. It's where they got married, on top of where my dad actually grew up in New Orleans. And a primetime game, it couldn't be any bigger. And you're on the field before the game, just taking it in. Again, I'd never done an NFL game before. I've done several college games now through the years, but I've never done an NFL game. And for that to be the first with everything surrounding it, I will never forget that night, and just how that whole crew welcomed me, from Babe Laufenberg to Christy Scales to Danny Miles and Ted Nichols-Payne and Bob Thomas. And that's such a special group. And just to put on Brad's headset for one night was such an honor. And in that moment, now, okay, you better do this justice. You would love a shootout, considering the talent on the field, even though Drew Brees wasn't available because of his injury. I mean, it turned into a rock fight that the Saints won, but it was still such a blast considering the drama. And, hey, I remember, I got to meet Al Michaels on the field before the game. That is something I never pictured being able to do. And
can I just you didn't get to meet him, like, oh my gosh, I met Al Michaels because he came to speak at a class when I was in college, but I was just like a student. You got to meet Al Michaels, and you were, hey, I'm Ted Emrich, I'm broadcasting for the Cowboys tonight. Like there's a difference there. There's like a level of respect that would be offered, I guess, in that interaction. Whereas if you were just like some kid who's like, oh my gosh, Al Michaels, I'm a big fan. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's a
well, I sure, but I think I might have fanboyed him. So he asked me. He was aware of the story. He actually came up to me. I didn't see him, until the last minute. He was coming from a different angle. I was talking with Babe at the time. And he comes up to me and, heard all about it, whatever, how are you feeling? Are you nervous? And I said, Al, honestly, I'm more nervous meeting you right now. The game I felt good about. You do your prep, and after, yes, it's an NFL game, and oh my gosh, you're filling in for Brad Sham, and yes, you take all of that under consideration, but then you know what? A football game is going to be played. And I have prepped for games at a national level now for, a few years running. And, once you get a handle on the level of information that comes your way for an NFL game, it can be like drinking out of a fire hose. But still, you pare it down. What is important to this particular game? What is important to this audience, our audience, the Cowboys fans? And then you have a game, and it's like you've prepared all week for this. You're ready for it. But there's Al Michaels. Okay, this is different. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. And so I had a hard time doing that. But he was wonderful in that moment, and offered words of encouragement, and so it was just such a special night all the way around, and I was just knocked down by the level of support and even the feedback on social media. You don't want to check that during any game, really, but the fact that it just, again, from what I could see, at least people reaching out to me, who knows, maybe on message boards or something, which I will not check, who's this clown filling in for Brad? We want Brad back.
That was me. I was the one who was posting.
That was you. Yeah. That's right. But people, reaching out to me, it was all positive. And that meant so much because that was a dream night all the way around.
Do you have anything from that game, spotting chart, anything that you've kind of kept as a commemoration of that night?
For sure. I keep the flip card from every game that I do. I don't know what I'm going to do with them eventually. Certainly kept the credential. It's funny, Christy even brought the full game book, the full stat pack that they print out, just reams and reams of paper. Said, you're going to want to have this. And I didn't argue. So I took it, and I kept that as well. And yes, to your point, I also kept the spotting charts. So I have all of that because that, yes, just, hey, being honest, in the future, I want to do more NFL games, wherever that happens to be. Listen, if you're doing football play-by-play and your goal isn't doing the NFL, there's something wrong with you. We would all love to do that. Who knows when that'll come? Who knows if that will ever come? And so for this particular moment, for this game, with everything surrounding it, that meant so much to me. And on top of that, being able to, I took my dad's ashes down to New Orleans, and I was able to fulfill his wishes the day of the game. I sprinkled them at Mellott Park, a recreational field, baseball park, Little League and youth baseball facility in Gretna, which is just across the Mississippi on the west bank of New Orleans. And, took a cab out there Sunday morning and was able to sprinkle my dad's ashes. Those were his wishes. And it just the confluence of events here. Like, I'm able to do this the night that I am filling in for Brad Sham in my dad's hometown where my mom and dad got married. Like, it could not have been more special. And, that will always stick with me.
All right, I want to ask you two last questions. One involves another influential figure, someone I never got the chance to meet, but I know someone who is special to you and so many others, and that's Bill Mercer. You went to North Texas. There's a joke in our industry that there's the Syracuse mafia, and maybe nationally there's not as much notoriety for North Texas, but certainly in DFW there's so many great broadcasters who have come out of that North Texas program, and not just on-air talent. A lot of great off-air, behind the camera type of individuals who have gone on to do great things. But I'm curious what sort of an impact the North Texas mafia, led by Bill Mercer, has had on you.
I love Bill so much, and Thank goodness he is still with us. I mean, he is in his 90s, Jared, and I feel like if you needed him to fill in on a Rangers game sometime next week, he would be ready. And he is still so sharp. And he keeps in touch. And I treasure that relationship so much. I remember I was a junior in high school, and my dad was on a panel for a Texas Association of Broadcasters event. Bill was the keynote speaker. And I'll never forget, Bill said, as I got the chance to meet him very briefly, my dad introduced me, and Bill knew my dad going back to when my dad was working at that commercial station in Denton, KDNT. And of course, Bill was at North Texas and running the program and all of that. And Bill said to me, "Come to North Texas, we'll make a broadcaster out of you." And I knew where I wanted to go. I didn't apply anywhere else. And, I get laughed at sometimes, when I tell people that, really, North Texas? But that was the only place for me because of Bill, because of the tradition, the heritage of that radio and television program. I mean, you said it. People like Craig Way and Mark Followell and Dave Barnett and George Dunham and Craig Miller, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And so many whose names you might not know that, like you said, perform such important roles, if not more important, behind the scenes. That's all Bill. Bill started that program. He started KNTU. And we just recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of KNTU, and you feel like you're sitting under the learning tree. And I do like to say I drove him into retirement. Like, I was not expecting. I'm taking his fall play-by-play class, and he announces late in the semester that he's retiring, and so I don't even get the chance to take his basketball and baseball play-by-play course. Like, come on, you couldn't wait around one more semester? That was in 2007. And just that one class, and there were others too that were not play-by-play related. I learned so much. His feedback, just his attitude, his philosophy. I mean, it's a Yoda-like presence, and I'm not being hyperbolic. It just, you hope that you can soak up as much as you can when you're around him. And I'm thankful that I did. And I'm thankful that I was in a class where he got to listen to my, at the time, terrible work every week. And I was able to improve as a result.
All right, last question for you. The process of learning. How do you go about learning when it comes to broadcasting or anything that I guess you are in a position to learn? I guess it doesn't have to be limited to broadcasting, but how do you go about that process? Because to me, you are as strong of a learner as I know, and so I'm curious, like, what your process is.
Oh man, I've it's probably crystallized a lot more here during the pandemic, when we've all had a little bit more time to devote to ourselves and our growth. And at least that's been the case for me. That there was, like, the world stops, and okay, what next? Do you just want to wallow in self-pity and you lost this event and that event? And I mean, seriously, my whole March and April just got, it just imploded, and it's off the calendar. And, that's stuff you were counting on. And, yes, you were looking forward to it, certainly, but financially it was a big hit as well. And you can either just sit around and, curse and, do whatever, shake your fist, or I I reasoned after a little bit, like, what would, somebody that I look up to, what would they do in this situation? You're either getting worse or you're getting better. And so that meant watching a lot of my own work and self-critiquing, both on radio and TV, and really, truly listening. Now you have the time. Why not? But also something that I hadn't done that I'm so glad I did, and I'm certainly going to do it a lot more moving forward, and that is really, truly watching the work of those that I really respect. I am a huge fan of Ian Eagle with CBS and Turner. I'm a huge fan of Dave Pasch on ESPN, among others, Kevin Kugler, and just really like watching full games, football, basketball, whatever, watching full games and pausing and hitting play, when the moment strikes. Like, why did they phrase this that way? Why did they not talk in this situation? How did they set up their analyst for this moment? Just every little bit, all those little things that can take a good broadcaster and turn them into a great one. I mean, they all have it. And so to really sit down, take notes, not just listen, not half-heartedly, or listen half-heartedly to my own work. Oh, that sounds pretty good. No, you can't do that, and especially when you have the time to do it. And it makes me that much more excited for when our seasons really do crank back up.
Well, there you go. That's episode 67 of the Just a Sec Conversation with the great Ted Emrich. Special shout out to my man Zach Rowe for producing the Just a Sec podcast series. Like Ted, Zach, a rising star in the industry, and I appreciate all of his hard work, and I appreciate you for tuning in. Again, a reminder, please feel free to send this link, this interview with or send it to anyone who you think might be interested, sharing it with friends, family, whomever. Just clicking the subscribe button, all that stuff goes a long way to helping to support this project. Until next time, stay safe, be healthy. We'll talk to you later.